was just watching an episode of Rick Glassman's podcast where he had Shits and Gigs on there. And I've come across Rick Glassman before in different episodes. It came via that, I can't even remember her name now, but she's another podcast, and then she created, she's just like quite young, pretty, like naive looking character. And she has this persona and people can't quite crack it. And it turns out it just seems to be this like coping mechanism that she has, and she's starting to get a level of awareness and control over it. Whereas before it seemed like it was definitely a part of an ego that she had created, and it had kind of taken over her, and she had started to become it. Anyway, Rick kind of saw that and was able to socially manipulate in a playful manner, in a comedic manner, in a cheeky little attempt to like manipulate your psyche and manipulate your level of awareness and your intellect. He will be able to socially tweak people once he gets to understand them, and he tries different ways to make them come out of their shell and make them be more like aware of what else is going on, what other ways that we're playing here in conversation. And it's hard to describe without you watching the episodes, but on this one where he's got Shits and Gigs on, I see it more evidently where Fuhad is starting to, he enters cold because Fuhad enters cold because, you know, he doesn't know this guy, and it's the same level of like neutral coolness that you'd present with any new stranger, right? And so throughout the show, Fuhad is just quietly observing Rick and matching the pace with the conversation. And he's realizing the little tricks that Rick pulls conversationally, and the little strings he pulls to manipulate people and make them move in a certain direction and get a certain reaction. And then he's studying them. And so it's almost like Fuhad is looking behind the curtain, and he's seeing Rick behind the curtain pull all these strings, and he's seeing the puppeteers, the puppeteered, you know, the characters in the show, the people who he's having a conversation with. And it's almost like Fuhad is watching this happen, and he's just quietly fascinated with this dynamic as well. So Fuhad is, in this instance, just a third-party viewer, and that's what's interesting to me, is that rarely are there times that people like Rick are caught in the act and have people become aware enough that he's like just all the way that he's playing around. And I think that from Fuhad's perspective, he was warming up to Rick because he was realizing, oh man, he's got so much social mastery. And by that, if you attach your ego to that, you'd say that I can see someone who's able to control and manipulate people. So his intellect and his wit and his social prowess is that much more elevated that he can do it in subtle ways or overt ways, but he's not using it to his advantage, because that's what Fuhad was also watching for. He's also watching for, is this guy just gonna be arrogant and try to bring people down and use their wit to, you know, make themselves feel better? Or is this guy using his wit to make people feel comfortable and make people feel like come out of their shell and make people switch on and activate their intellect to match the level that's possible within this conversation, because not everyone is the same in the conversation. And so I think Fuhad was like, Rick is more evolved socially, and he's aware of all of these nuances that he can tweak and he can pull. But with regards to the third person in that podcast, James, from my observer point of view and speaking this narrative, this notion, unfortunately, James didn't seem like he was switched on to a lot of these dynamics, or at least this background, behind the curtain dynamic between Fuhad and Rick. I mean, ego, when it's called out to be like, oh, you're not aware of this the whole time, what a mug, then it will be reactive and it will say, no, I did, and try and make up some reason, or just be at peace with, yeah, I wasn't aware of that, so what? It's a tough pill to swallow from the end of James, who's someone more egocentric, especially around the subject of intelligence, academia. I feel intimidated and really uncomfortable when I'm in the presence of people who are academically so much more smart. They've got a memory that's been able to retain so much more information than my sieve, if you can even call it that, of a brain. It's ridiculous. So I should be putting more focus into, as a personal side note, developing my memory. So I should probably seek out different apps and stuff, but I'm not in a position to become a subscriber. I can't really afford stuff. So the truthfulness of this outlet. Coming back to this episode of Rick Glassman with Shits and Gigs. I really like that, and I want to lean into recognizing characters, for example, like Rick. I've seen them all over the place, and they can be individuals who possess so much more of a refined ability to socially understand. There are so many dynamics that can be played and so many meanings that can be understood in the blink of an eye, in the subtlest way that you structure a sentence. It can be the language you use. There are so many different nuances. And this is a social game. It's a game of wit. And ultimately, if you are wittier, then you have leverage over those who are not as witty. And witty here, of course, is not limited to the humorous side. Humor is definitely an aspect that's heavily used because it allows a lot of freedom. We can disarm under the banner of humor and comedy. But it also definitely includes just sharp wit, being able to understand things and be aware of things. And I think wit is more akin to awareness than general intelligence or memory of facts and figures. And I want to study these characters, these people who have really refined their social wit, because there's such a high level of awareness there, and it would be great to have conversations with people like them, because if you're that aware of social dynamics and you have worked on your own personal mastery so that you can just change color like a chameleon, it is that kind of social chameleon who does have immense wit too. And so those characteristics of an individual I'm fascinated by, because I feel a kinship to that, to my own place in the spectrum. I'm not saying I'm better or worse than anyone. It's not about that. It's about recognizing. It's just about another level of awareness where you go, oh, now I see that. And it's just unveiling more of the tapestry of the matrix. You know what I mean? And the more you are aware of these dynamics, then inherently you're like, oh, well, that must mean that I'm a little bit better, a little bit more evolved. And you can keep that to yourself, or you can let your ego jump onto that and go, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to be amazing. If I master this, I'm going to be the master of everything and the big bad boy. So that's more the direction of the extreme arrogance. And wit without the humor and without the humility and without the integrity to manage yourself in the positive spectrum rather than the negative spectrum, because then you could turn into arrogance. That could turn into your wit becoming so sharp and your intelligence becoming so great that your ego has latched onto this mechanism, this superpower, this social prowess, social intelligence, to then manipulate people just for your pleasure, just because you can. And it's just a game. You will continue to do things until you're caught. And in fact, by that time, you're so developed in your social intelligence that you're confident you can convince yourself out of any situation, and using your powers in the ego realm of, well, money and control and all that crap that you've built up through this power that you have, you're pretty confident that you can get yourself out of any situation, and you're kind of untouchable, and that then further feeds this ego trip, and you become more powerful and you become more intelligent, and then ultimately you become more arrogant, because that's all in the realm of the ego. And the more that you feed into that realm, you will get extreme versions of what's out the other side. And that means that you're probably going to become this archetype of this narcissistic, highly intelligent, but lost touch with authenticity and lost touch with awareness of grace and chaos. Well, maybe you lean more into the chaos. Maybe that's an archetype. Anyway, I'm fascinated with understanding different people's archetypes, and it comes from breaking these concepts down, recognizing the patterns and going, oh, that feels like it belongs in this sector, and then that feels like it belongs in this sector, and I separate, and then I study, and then I bring them together, and I realize where the spectrum lies. And I'm doing that all the time now. And there's something about this social intelligence that's a really key aspect that people can leverage as a tool to really focus on, and to beware the pitfalls of not letting it become egocentric and then turn into arrogance and just like spiteful putting people down. Because that's the area that I detected in watching, what was it, Succession. Succession was an amazing show that had that, jacked up. You throw money at it and you pump it full of steroids, and that's what the characters portrayed in Succession. They were just having to become social masters in their own way. Some were just oblivious in that space. Like Siobhan was becoming a master in that space of social awareness and social intelligence. And the other two were less so. And you saw the dynamic of that. And you saw that all along, they were just kids who wanted to be loved and have a normal life. But through, obviously, their relationship with their father being the primary thing that underpins this whole show, is that's it. They were just dealing with their own archetype, depending on how they responded, what their relationship was like. If they chose to stay within ego and chase that dragon and be the most powerful and be the thing that they were always told or like demanded of them to be. And they try and, you know, they try and be the top dog, and it's ego. That's all the ego side. And so the social intelligence, when it's jacked up in the ego realm, is these people who are just cutthroat sharks in the water, smelling blood and going for the kill each time. And that uses that social intellect to always be playing chess with people and ultimately just looking after your own and leaving people behind, because it's a game. You have psychologically understood, oh, I'm aware that all of this, I can play people like a game of chess. I can actually do that. And then they say, well, this is quite literally a game for me. I've become aware enough that I know this happens. And I want to keep it to myself because I want to play this game and take full advantage of it, find every leverage, and pull it. Every lever. And I'm going to keep doing it because no one's stopping me. The law isn't intelligent like this. Detectives try to be intelligent and understand these patterns of mastery, of manipulation. But unless I do any crimes, then they will never know. And I can be the master of my own doing. So then that is very useful to get shit done. It's a dark art as far as I'm concerned, because if you lean fully into it and you don't keep the balance of awareness through the side of high, through the side of grace, or understanding the aspects of chaos and not letting that creep in through the back door either, because if chaos creeps in through the back door of ego's trip, then you're going to have that power and that social mastery. And then you've got this maniacal side to give a catalyst and give a boost to ego's abilities to really screw people over. And they can be self-destructive too if they lean too much into the chaos as well. Because if they've not acknowledged grace at all, then they will see no value for grace and they would just become self-destructive ultimately. And that's really sad, but it's important to understand these archetypes of people. And if you understand that they are this archetype and they understand it too, and then you trace back to see their history of how they became more and more like that, and then you trace it back to an inflection point, or more truthfully, multiple inflection points, where they were either conditionally, externally, or whether they went through some internal realizations and they reached a point of new awareness and they were affected and they leaned more towards one side than the other. And so they just keep going in a direction. And it can be charged negatively, it can be charged positively. Yeah, and that builds someone's history. That builds someone's lineage. And so you can trace it back. And if they've got good memory, and if they've got good feelings associated with that, then that's literally therapy. And if you understand this formula, even through just this like really, messy interpretation that I'm making now, hopefully understandings can be extrapolated from it using AI summaries, which is the most useful thing for me to just concisely put my points down without me having to pick through everything and edit. I would not waste my time doing that. I want to just be the conduit. I want to be the vessel that carries this notion from nothing into something at least cohesive, and then document it. Yeah. So I want these points to be documented, and I'm kind of losing track more. So